Those years passed quickly for me, and I dreamed of going to college. I didn't talk about it too much. I thought maybe I could arrange something with working, because I knew my parents would say, well, the boys, and I heard this many times, the boys have to go to college. But you'll probably get married. What's the difference? So I didn't discuss it with them. But I had my dreams. There was a contest in the homeroom at high school where you had the director of plays was our homeroom teacher of English. And there was a contest that she prepared us for. Drake University was going to pick someone for a scholarship to Drake in the theater department. I won the scholarship. Well, I mean, this was like, to me, the world opened up. I would get my tuition paid for, and they said I could get a job on campus in the cafeteria or somewhere that would pay for my room and board. So I was set. I didn't have to discuss it. I knew what I was going to do. That was the summer where my father decided this was the time he had to do something with his life that went beyond being a traveling salesman. He longed to go into business for himself. He had seen how these small town merchants grew their businesses. He was sure he could do it. All he needed was a little financing. And he came home and told my mother one spring evening, that he saw a location in Kewannee, Illinois. It was a great location on the main street. The other ladies' stores in town were stodgy. He would open up something that was appealing to the young, and the family would enjoy it once they got there. My mother said, nothing doing. I'm not taking Rosie, who was 17, and already, you have to think about her future. Who's she going to find in a town like that with no Jews? She'll either have to be an old maid, or God forbid, marry a goy. The boys, what kind of Jewish life will they have? I pull Eddie out of Cheder, and Shelby's growing up. Where will I shop? That's not a life for us. Forget it. The next weekend he came home, he says, I put down a $50 deposit for the lease. It was a Fort Hopkins drugstore where they pulled up the fountain stools. There were holes in the floor, but it was a wonderful location. My father said we could build bins for the dresses. And my mother said, what did you do? That's so foolish. Forget the money. We'll lose the $50. The next week he came home. He says, Pearl, I got some credit. I bought some merchandise. He finally persuaded her to go and look at it and convinced her that they have to do something. They've got 3 children growing up. They have to educate the boys. They needed more money, and this is the way to do it. He knew he could do it. Well, we ended up going to Kewannee. I remember when we were taken to look at the store, and we stayed in what was then called tourist homes. For $5, somebody in an old frame Victorian house rented out a room upstairs with a handmade quilt, little rag rugs on the floor, clean, fresh, $5, and there were enough beds for the whole family to sleep. And that was our first night in Kewannee. Well, my father couldn't afford to give up his job. My mother would have to run the store. My mother, who hadn't worked since Hickok, Rosie would work in the store, and the 2 boys would be enrolled in school. It was grim, and my mother couldn't handle it. Her depression came at her. She spent many hours sleeping on an old chaise longue that we had in the basement that we put from our sun parlor in the basement of the store. and slept it off. I and the one employee we hired, who was hired to be an alteration woman. In those days, every time you bought a dress, it was either had to be raised at the waist, or at the shoulder, or taken at the seams. You needed alteration for everything. So she would only help on the floor when she wasn't busy with alterations. Well, we didn't do much business. She didn't have too much time. She taught me how to sew on the machine. I changed the mannequins in the window. I sold merchandise on the floor. My father showed me how to keep a notebook. Very, very elementary bookkeeping. What we took in and what the bills were, what we had to pay out. My mother insisted that I go to the bank because the receipts were so small, she was embarrassed. So I took the receipts to the, maybe every other day or every third day because they were small even for me to take. My mother and I would buy groceries on the way home, walk to the house that we rented. My little brothers had already come home from school. My mother had a girl in the house who was there to take care of the boys. Marcella was her name. Marcella lived in a little cottage far out of the borders of the town with her mother. They invited us to their home for a late Saturday night little supper because we were open Saturday till 9 o'clock. That's when the farmers all came to town. This was an education to me. No running water. They had a pump in the sink in the kitchen. An outhouse instead of a bathroom. My mother said later, and they were very hospitable, very hospitable. Franklin stove in the middle of the little cottage. My mother said, why doesn't Marcella want to stay with us at night? She'd have a warm shower, she'd have a nice bed with running water and heat. And blah, blah. No, Marcella wanted to go home. She wanted to be with her home, her little house with her mother. And my mother couldn't stand it, like when there was a rainstorm or a lot of snow. And my father would drive Marcella home, and my mother would, Marcella, stay with us tonight. Marcella never wanted to. My mother couldn't understand this. It's not practical. I couldn't understand it. And we learned another culture. Where I grew up in the North Side, all our friends were Jewish. The stores we patronized were all Jewish stores. Even in high school, Senn High School, which didn't have more than 15–20% Jewish kids, but all our friends were Jewish kids. To be thrust into a rural community, population 10,000, a couple of factories supported the workers in the town, but most of the economy was the farmland around. It was the way it was done in the turn of the century. Farmers came to town on Saturday night, hung out on the sidewalks, you know, smoking their pipes. The women shopped. They spoke differently. They thought differently. They reacted differently. I actually could hear my family sounding like foreigners. We hadn't picked up the lingo. The lovely thing about it was that these people had beautiful manners. Now, they could be prejudiced, they could be hateful in many ways, they could be crooked, but the manners were there. If a woman came in the store and didn't see anything she liked, she'd always say, oh, thank you so much for showing. I just guess I'm not in the mood today, but I'll be back. They never let you down publicly. Of course, we were never invited to anybody's home. We were outlanders. Amongst the other 8 outlanders, the Army-Navy store, owned by the Harrises, like in Maywood. The furniture store, owned by Mr. Feinstein, the optometrist, Mr. Weiss. Every Jew that was there, I think it was 8, had a business, and that's why he was there. They came to make a living. When they wanted high holiday services, somebody's son-in-law or cousin or brother-in-law obliged, so they had a minion. And we rented the Redmond's Lodge for our services and got a student, a rabbinical student from Peoria, to do our services. So there was a way. And the 8 Jewish families socialized together, played poker on Saturday nights when they closed the stores, and that was the social life. Until my mother became known as a very expert bridge player.